Hello, everybody. Nice to see familiar faces
It
and welcome
is.
to all of the new people. This is great to have you. I'm just going to ask you all before we get started just to change the view at the top of your screen to the speaker view, unless you prefer to look at everybody. But if you switch it to the speaker view, you will get whomever Kaylee has highlighted on the screen, and it should, for the most part, be Faye. But you might occasionally get this person here. Um, okay, Faye, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate having you here. We had planned on having you a couple of years ago, and I'm so glad that you're able to join us with this incredible collection of short stories, Swimmers in Winter. It was published by Invisible Publishing, which is an independent publisher that Junction Reads is a huge fan of. And I think it's available in most independent bookstores. There was one that I couldn't see it in, and it might have been Type Books, but Kaylee can figure that out and leave it in the chat. So before we officially get started, I would like to acknowledge the land that we are on right now. Faye and Kaylee and I and a couple of other people are in Toronto. So I will acknowledge Tekaronto. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Wendat, Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. It is still home to many Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on their territory. Thank you very much. So Faye, I would like to ask you, because we are all influenced by what great writers are reading, I would love to ask you what you're reading right now, and what you'd recommend to people here. Sure.
Okay. Well, thank you, Allison, and thanks so much for having me at Junction Reads. It's great to be here, and thanks for including Swimmers in Winter in your series. And it's also so lovely to see these familiar faces and new faces tuning in today. So I wanted to talk about my first read of 2021, and it's called Self-Portrait by Celia Paul. It is a memoir by Celia Paul, who is a visual artist and writer. And this is her first book. It was published last year. And at its heart, it's about the physical and mental and emotional work of being an artist in the specific context of Celia Paul's environment and history and identity. It's also about her sort of coming to terms with and thinking through a relationship that she had with another artist, Lucienne Freud, who's a really, really well-known British artist. And he died in 2011. So she's writing this book, I think, in a way to kind of reckon with her younger self, the self that had a relationship with him for 10 years. They had a son together. And at the same time, it was a relationship that was a real source of struggle for her. So she's thinking through who was that younger self, who was part of that situation. She's also sort of paying tribute to that younger self. And I think, too, something I really appreciated about it was sort of figuring out how to give that younger self a kind of dignity that she couldn't find at the time, or that was taken from her in a sense. So the other thing that I really liked about this book was the style of writing, because it has a kind of luminous quality that her visual art also has. And in fact, paintings and sketches of hers are interspersed with the text. And it's really interesting to see them both together. And the last thing I'll say about this book is that Zadie Smith wrote an essay on it in the New York Review of Books, I think in November. And Zadie Smith's essay is really interesting because in part it's a review of this book, but she also uses the book as a starting point to kind of talk about some of the larger issues it raises around the artist and the muse, and also around the power dynamics of seeing and being seen that are part of art making, power dynamics that have a lot to do with sort of identity categories like gender and race and class. So I really recommend Zadie Smith's essay as well as the book. It works as a kind of companion to the book. So that's the one that I wanted to talk about.
Very nice. When was Celia most active as an artist?
So she was born in 1959 and grew up in England. And she grew up in an area called England called Devon, in the countryside. Right. But she was able to go to London to the Slade School of Fine Art. So that's where she did her education. And she still lives and works there as a professional artist.
Yeah, very nice. That's a perfect gift for many people in my family. That's great. So just to let everybody know, we're kind of changing the structure of the reading today, which I'm really excited about. I was reluctant at first, but thankfully Faye came up with this idea, and I am excited. We're going to break it down into 3 sections. Faye's going to do 3 short readings. Each reading I'm going to follow up with a question. And then at the very end, I'm gonna ask one question and then open it up to everybody. So hopefully that works. If something inspires you, if there's a question that you're inspired by after any one of the readings, feel free to put the question there. Kaylee will grab it and hold it until the end. I hope that's okay. All right. So I'll first start with Faye's biography. Faye lives in Toronto. Her writing has appeared in literary magazines, including Joyland, and she has published a chapbook, Floodlands, with Junction Books. Swimmers in Winter is her first collection of short story. And I love it. I'm excited to have you, Faye.
Thanks, Alison.
Take it away.
Okay, so I am going to read from the title story of the collection. It's the first one, and it's called Swimmers in Winter. And I'm going to read from the very beginning of the story. I can't read Lucille's smile. I know her name, and that's all. We only met a moment ago in a back room so dark you have to look twice to tell anything. She stepped out of the shadows into the copper light pooling around the bar and ordered another drink. Her face and hair streaked gritty with illumination. She leaned there and waited, inside the music, breathing in the perfume and smoke and the deeper sense of the strangers all around, watching for who was looking. Moving toward her meant being willing to fall first. Around us, the room is a small ocean of girls, rough, beautiful. It's long after midnight, and Lucille and I stand side by side, a sliver of space between us. We watch the dance floor, drinking hard, while girls hook and pushers work the sidelines. Women's voices slap and swing their laughter up against the music from the record player, looked after by elegant Ivan the bartender, who knows most of the patrons by first name. In the center, they're dancing so close. I drink deep and gesture to Lucille with my hands. Words spill away from me and I scramble to catch them, raising my voice to hold her attention through the clamor, the catcalls, the sweet murmurs. I tell her I'm Florence and that I do a little bit of everything. They call me a downtowner because deep in the city is where I'm at home, living in a ramshackle building with a hole in the roof that lets in the birds. Huh, that sounds familiar, Lucille answers, laughing low and calm, a little resigned. Brushing her dark hair away from her round face, she sways a little on her feet as though the music has caught her at the waist. She glances past me at the endless action. The top button of her blouse has come off, leaving behind a few loose black threads and a soft window of bare skin below her neck that grows wider as she moves. First time here? I ask her. Hardly. Yours? These girls are my crowd, I proclaim, hearing the harsh brightness of my voice, how it must sound to her, flaunting and eager. Lucille turns to me, searching my face. So you make music? What do you play? A little bit of everything. Piano, mandolin, harmonica. Hearing this, she starts telling me about a kind of traveling show she plans to do next year, a musical tour. Lucille talks like someone who never runs out of what there is to lose. Nowadays, I play alone, I tell her with a smile. And now she sees me instead, me and the restless crowd of strangers. Lucille leans back as if to let us all go. She takes out a cigarette and I light it for her. Maybe you can write me a song, she says, her voice dipping with the weight of what she wants. I nod, as if it might keep her from drifting away. She reminds me of a girl I used to know, Magda, her slow burn and fast flame. Lucille touches my hand, the one holding the lighter. She rocks slow onto the balls of her feet, her lips a soft O in the smoke. I plan to take my band from here to New York, she says. We'll go everywhere and back again. Then she steps closer, filling the space. Want to come with us, Florence? She remembers my name, so I kiss her like it's something to say. And then I get ready to kiss her again, slow and long, the burnt sugar taste of her mouth soaked with rum still on my tongue. But just as I feel her breath on my face, my thoughts turn to escape. We hear them before we see them coming. A swarm of cops, at least 30, moving fast, the flesh of their pale skin charged with force, hats pulled low, thick uniforms, truncheons lifted. Dancers still in each other's arms stumble as they turn toward the sound. The music continues as if stuck in a dream behind barks of police, move back, get up against the wall. I reach for her hand and push hard through the panic of the room toward the fire exit. In the shock of frozen air filled with sirens, women hastily pull on coats, then spill from the heavy door into the alleyway behind Dundas and Elizabeth. Lost in intent like swimmers in winter, they dive into the cover of darkness through heavy drifts of falling snow. I turn to ask Lucille which way is home, but she's already gone. I stumble around in a circle, searching for her, calling out her name once, twice, toward the escaping forms. Possessions lie scattered on the icy ground, dropped or forgotten in the rush to get away. A single glove, a pair of glasses with cracked lenses, an orphan scarf, an undone string of pearls, cigarettes and cigars still long, beer sloshed on the snow, flasks bleeding gin or brandy. A woman screams in the street, a tremor that tears up and down, burning. It could be Lucille's voice. I almost move toward it, but stop myself. At the other end of the alley, paddy wagons and an ambulance rush north to Dundas, red lights flickering on the snow before disappearing. The cops could find me any second. I could be arrested, beaten in the snow. Hidden behind the building, away from public view, the cops will swing their boots, fists, and sticks harder against the skin and muscle they find, even breaking bones. I've felt their blows before, pain that bends the body into itself, my head crushed against my heart. All I can do is run. Survival is instinct to me, an old demon friend. I let her enter, let her come. The late night streets in Chinatown are unusually deserted, hollowed out by the glow of streetlights and the shop and restaurant signs alight with letters. The farther I get from the Continental Hotel, the quieter, and more still the city becomes.
Thank you. I can never tell if I'm unmuted. That was such a powerful story. Opening up with that, I just knew in the first 20 lines how much I was going to love this collection. So the first two stories we've got Lucille, Magda, and Florence.
Yes.
I wanted to talk to you because I spent time at the archives and researched for a story a while ago. I'd like to talk to you about the research and how challenging it was, and other stories that you came across, and your experience of that.
Yeah, well, so the first two stories in Swimmers in Winter are set, one is set during World War II in Toronto, and the other story is set at the end of the 50s in Toronto. And I was interested in what life was like for queer women in Toronto at that time. And I have to say that finding information on that history was not very easy. There isn't a lot of accessible, or there wasn't when I was doing the research about that period in terms of what queer women's lives were like. But I knew that it was also a time of real social change, particularly in terms of gender roles for working class women in the city. And I had writers who are here will know what I'm talking about here, and that I had this voice that came to me, which was Florence's voice, and also a situation of her, needing to escape a bar raid and going out the back door into a very cold winter's night at the end of January, sort of like the one we've got in Toronto right now. And so I had this voice, and I think that when you're writing historical fiction, particularly historical fiction working with histories that have been marginalized or aren't, or that are difficult to access within dominant culture, it's really important to have a strong sense of a voice and a kind of vivid sense of a character, because it becomes like your touchstone. Because when you do the historical research, you really have to throw your net really wide and bring in what you can find and then sort through it. And it's that voice and the character that becomes what can determine for you which details you're gonna keep and which you're gonna let go of. And when I say historical details, I'm talking about what the time and place felt like, kind of on a sensory level, like what it was to be a person at that time. And so that's why the narrative voice is really important. And I remember distinctly finding an academic essay, which was one of the very few I could find about this time. And the reason it was like gold to me, because it included all of these firsthand accounts by women who had been in Toronto at that time. And it's not that I would use those accounts, but they gave me a sense of what was possible to imagine about the place and time, in terms of how it felt to be alive then. And so it was that essay with the firsthand accounts, as well as archival photographs do that for me as well, because they give you a little glimpse, and then your imagination and your knowledge from doing the research kind of can take it from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. So we're going to go into the second reading. For those of you who don't know, the book has been described as a trifecta of diptychs, and that a diptych is a piece of art that hinges in the middle and folds. And so you open and you see two pieces of art that are connected. And the book itself is written two stories, and two stories. And so Faye, you're going to share a reading from one of the stories in the middle.
Yeah, so I'm going to read from the third story in the collection. And so it is from the second diptych, and it's right at the beginning of the story. The story's called Things to Remember, and this story is broken into sections, and each section has a title. So this first section is called Eva. I had a job in that diner before Claudia did. It only seems like she got everything with her, but I was there first, alone. Day after day in that steaming kitchen, we worked as dishwashers and short order cooks. We were on our feet for hours, wearing obligatory hairnets and knee-length aprons tied over tank tops and old jeans stained to a fade. Our bare feet squealed across the linoleum floor in fluorescent sneakers from Byway or Thrifties. After a year, those shoes became lace-up combat boots worn even in summertime. Claudia's apron usually lay flat against her after she tied it on like armor. See how much I remember? All I wanted from the future is that it would be different from what I'd already known. I only saw the tasks at hand as things tying me to the present, tethered there, impatient. When I knew Claudia better, I told her, this is what you do on your way to something else. The trick is to always keep moving. And if you do look back, be ready for anything. When no one else was looking, when no one else was watching, we covered our ears with our hands, elbows angled outward as if to ward off double-fisted blows, keeping our eyes wide open. It was a way to both escape the past and to face it down. But from the beginning, Claudia had tunnel vision. Her hands were like tools when she worked, adept and precise. Sure, she might have made mistakes, but it was all practice. That's all it was to her. Whenever the other dishwasher went on his endless breaks, I'd watch Claudia move away to stand over the big metal sink basins. She would brace her hips against them and pummel gooey traces and grease streaks of food off the dishes and down the drain. Her fingers gripped the hose with its steady jet of hot water, like she was holding onto a rope to pull herself up. I wanted the focus she had. I wanted to know what it was like to have her attention. We shared almost every shift. How are you? I'd ask, not looking, waiting. A question so ordinary, it's easy not to give a real answer, but you gotta start somewhere. Doing fine, she'd say. Yourself? Handing me silence above the constant clang and rush of the kitchen. For a long time, I knew next to nothing about her. Our conversations were always cut off by a new task, a new order, the entrance of one of the other cooks or a server. One morning in mid-October, a few of the staff called in sick. Another cook just didn't show. I'm ready to quit, he told us the previous week. I've got something better lined up. Fewer of us there meant more work, but also more space, and Claudia took the lead. The manager didn't notice until mid-morning. He walked into the kitchen and looked around as if he'd lost something, then paused to find us doing prep for the afternoon. You can see I'm short-staffed today, he said, so you'll have to handle the lunch rush. Maybe you didn't notice we just got through breakfast, I thought to myself. No problem, Claudia said. Keep the customers' orders coming steady, he warned her. No gaps. After the lunch prep was done, those of us working in the kitchen decided we would start taking our breaks as the orders began coming in, instead of waiting till it got real busy. The others took their turns first, leaving just Claudia and me. I said to her, "You're so quiet today." It was only half true. Claudia always seemed quiet. She looked up at me as she made grilled cheese sandwiches, buttering 6 slices of bread on both sides, moving in a flash, 2 fingers red from a recent burn. "I'm concentrating," she said. I smiled. "You're not bored?" "I don't get bored." Claudia put down the knife and reached for the pan. "Really?" "No, there's always something to do." "You mean in this job?" "In this job, in life." She turned back to the sandwiches. "Huh, I thought about it for a minute. It's funny to hear someone say that. I think a lot of people would get bored. Her focus was back on her hands now. She laid the sandwiches out with intention, side by side, neat in the pans. You know what it's like when you got all these things to figure out? Like everything is piling up and you can't get to it? I thought I understood. I tried to as I stirred the big pot of cream of tomato on the back burner. So what's on your mind? I asked her. Memories, I guess. Nothing bad. It's just that they never go. There's a pile of them there, but they're all out of reach. She frowned as if in apology, but her eyes were bright. I wanted them to dare me. Like songs that get stuck in your head, I tried. No, not like that. She laughed warily, because you can sing a song to yourself, and it'll eventually disappear, get replaced by another one, I guess. Another order came in, tuna salad. I went to the fridge to get out the bowl we prepared that morning, an extra mayo. She hovered the spatula over the pan of grilled cheese, a rare moment of stillness. I went and stood beside her, watched the butter and orange cheddar sizzle with heat. This was basically against the rules. We were always to be doing something, not standing still, not waiting. She began to flip each sandwich, one at a time, briskly, with perfect aim. These memories, she continued, there's no story I can turn them into and retell. They're like just flashes, like quick flashes, and then they're gone. Still in my mind somewhere, but I'm always getting further away from them. Try thinking forward, I said. The past can wait because it's done. Think about the future instead. No one else is going to do that for you. Don't ask for permission either. Don't ask for permission was a phrase I found in a magazine at the grocery store, or maybe someone had said it on television. I tried to make the words sound like they belonged to me. The sandwiches were ready, so Claudia headed for the deep fryer. Almost every order came with fries. I thought maybe she hadn't heard me, so I tried again. Sometimes you have to take chances to get ahead. Later, I would offer her my own confessions, all of them in the past tense, as though my memories were shells that contained oceans. I told her things then that I haven't shared since. I did that with Claudia. It was a relief to turn myself inside out for her, heart in my mouth, then trail off. I told her the things I wanted to hear.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's hard to choose a favorite character among all of the women in Swimmers in Winter, but Claudia's pretty spectacular. I mean, Eva's great too, but uh, she's probably closer to my flawed nature than um, anyone else. So, in structuring Swimmers in Winter, I was fascinated. I mean, and there's a lot of ways to look at how you might have structured it, and whether that's in historical chronology with the past and the sort of 20 years ago, and then the future that shows up in the last two. Um, and then looking at the women, the three women that are included in each of those two stories. How did you come to this state? I'm imagining that each story was written individually. You may not have even written them in chronological order, but how did you end up with this final structure? And did you always know it was going to be, three diptychs? Three.
So, yeah, I didn't know that at the beginning, but I wanted to give the collection some kind of cohesion as a whole. And so I knew that I wanted to link the stories in some way. And I thought that it would be interesting to link them through a reoccurring character in each pair. So there's three different pairs, and in each pair between the two stories, there's a character who reoccurs, and the way that they reoccur is through is in the memories of another character. And there were a few reasons for doing that. One is that I was interested in looking at the way that we experience time. So if you step back and you look at the collection as a whole, it moves from the past, World War II, forward in time, and the last story in the collection is set in the future. And so that sort of speaks to the sort of forward movement of time that we're all aware of, where we're always moving into the future, into something unknown. But then within each pair, the movement in time is more of a circular movement, or a back and forth, because in the second story in each pair, a character is remembering the past, and another character from that past. And that, I think, was a way for me to explore the way that the past always is part of our present, and either haunts it, or shapes the present, or reveals something to us about the present.
Mm-hmm.
So that was why, I think that was one of the things that I was able to explore through this structure. And then just on a kind of technical level, once you have a structure, it as a writer or as an artist, it gives you a kind of constraint to work within.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be really productive, because when you've got a limit, or a shape that you need to work within, it kind of, I find it gets you to move deeper into what it is you're working with, or to explore in a kind of deeper way. And so I was glad to find that constraint as I was then revising, because I knew that I needed to work within that structure. And it helped me to kind of hone and fine tune what I wanted to do with the stories as a result.
Yeah. No, that's great. It's interesting how in you talking about time, I'm thinking about what I felt as a reader in reading the second stories of each of the pairs. I felt this absence, right? And not like I couldn't think of it as regret so much. But now that you've said time, now that you've talked about this sort of future versus past, I'm wondering if it is regret, like if that absence, not necessarily loss, but if that absence is some sort of regret. I mean, particularly with Jackie and Eva. Um, yeah, maybe we'll leave that to the end. I don't want to cloud the discussion with my feelings of it.
Sure. Well, I mean, I would just say, like, I think you're right on about that, in that part of what I was thinking about too, with that reoccurring character in the memory of one of the other characters, is the way that, the relationships we have, or even our encounters, even if they're brief encounters with somebody, or encounters that are cut off abruptly, we carry them with us into the next part of our lives. And there's kind of a ripple effect that, our relationships and our encounters have in as we move forward in our lives. And so that was certainly that sort of tension, that kind of reality about relationships was something I was also exploring in the stories.
Yeah, it was great. It really was an emotional experience, especially with the last story, given where we are in the world. And I'm excited you are going to share a reading from that last.
Yeah,
story.
that's
That's
great.
That's great.
Okay, so the last excerpt I'm going to read is from the story Floodlands. It's the final story in the collection, and I'm going to read right from the beginning of the story. Twice that I can remember, the river blossomed up its insides, moisture cleaving every surface, drips of water running like teeth along the edges of walls and ceilings. Afterwards, I would ride my bike, spraying up the muddy streets, my hands wrapped around the handlebars like a lover. The soaked landscape would pour by, a drowning village, a waterlogged dream. Once, the river took our cattle, a group of them standing together in a haphazard circle, stamping their feet and shaking their heads at the wind and the rain that tunneled round them. The river swept them all, a jangle of bodies, into its rush and roll. It also washed away the birds, their great plumage going under like festival sails. It took our necessary objects, blades, beds, the fires on which we cooked. It stole the warped musical instruments, bent by time and earlier floods, the scarce few photographs of children who are now old women and men far beyond recognition. The river stole the one faded image of my great-great-aunt Carmen. She was a warrior of her time, one who turned away from battle into what life had left. And like me, she had no children. When she died, those who loved her named her a warrior of peace. I have her name now, as well as my own, that means songmaker and builder. But I find myself wondering if any of this matters now, because the river will take it all away. This last time, it took Ella's baby. Some days, when I dream of the baby, she is laughing. Other days, crying. But always she is floating, her little round legs kicking like puckery fins, her face as visible to me as the moon. The women crowded around Ella weeping, and then they began to cook, spreading rich smells of food into the thickness of new moisture and the billowing clouds of insects. Nothing was dry here. Nothing was without the taste of something just gone. They say that cries of grief bring us closer to our animal selves. I have come to believe this is true. To care for Ella is to live with a wolf or a nightingale. They also say sadness dulls the tongue. Even so, or despite this, the women salvaged what they could from their soaked provisions. They went out further where the waters hadn't touched, they hunted, and what they brought back, they poured into their cooking for Ella's loss. I confess my tongue burned and leaped with the flavors they created as I sat quietly, eating with my dancing mouth and brushing away the little stabs of mosquitoes that clung to my uncovered skin. I ate as if I knew that this food, made by the grieving women, would give me the strength to sleep. And it is there that I would meet Ella's baby in my dreams.
Like I'm almost crying now. I cried during a couple of times in that story. Um, I'm so impressed, not just with the writing of this book, but with your reading and how poetic. I mean, it's almost as though you're inside the words. And I just can't applaud you enough for how you've read those three pieces. Thank you so much for giving so much to it. Um, I'd like to talk about the lyrical voice, because at so many points throughout, I went back and reread lines and reread paragraphs and really wanted to find myself back inside the language, because it, quite often when you're reading, you can get lost in the story and you just propel yourself naturally forward. I'm a super slow reader, so I sometimes, have to catch myself, um, and go back because I've mentally missed something. But with this collection, I didn't miss a beat because it was written in beats. And I like poetry. It is just such a natural, it demands to be reread. And I want to talk to you about how you approached that, how you approached each of these stories through that what I'm imagining is a poet's lens.
Well, thank you so much for your comments. I really appreciate it. And I think that, you know, for me, lyrical writing is most interesting when it's honest, because sometimes lyricism can kind of get caught up in its own aesthetic, its own beauty. But if you can keep it honest, it can be really effective, especially at creating a sense of intimacy, maybe more so than other styles of writing. And in the collection, I was interested in creating and kind of conjuring intimacy between the characters, and also between the reader and the narrative voice. And when I say intimacy, I don't just mean in the romantic sense, but in a kind of attentiveness, or when you give your attention over to a person or a space or a living thing, and it's a kind of gentle attention, not weak but open, and not intrusive and not imposing. And so I think that lyricism allows for that. And then it also allows for a kind of recognition of the paradox in intimacy, that you can never fully know another person or be known by them. And because in lyricism, there's also always a kind of quality of loss in that, within that style. I find, and I'm still trying to figure out why that is, or maybe not lost, but always an awareness of a kind of incompleteness. And then I think along with the lyricism, for me, fiction writing is most compelling when it's using sensory details. So like the experiences of the five senses: sound, sight, touch, smell, and taste. And the more vivid and original you can make those sensory details in fiction, and the more significance you can give them to the larger story, and also to the characters, that makes for really interesting fiction. And I think of these details as sort of like the fabric of the fiction writing. So I'm always aware of that, and I'm always trying to work with sensory experiences and details in my writing, and then combine that with the lyricism.
Yeah. No, I definitely felt you in saying that incompleteness. Like I really did feel that yearning
Uh-huh.
in reading all of the stories. I just can't say it enough how impressed I am, and I urge everyone who's here, tell your friends if they're struggling with how to make their language and their writing sound more poetic, sound more sensual, and fill it with something more than story. This is a perfect collection to start with. Before, I know there's a couple of questions there that Kaylee has, but before, I'm going to start with a question that a friend sent to me. She wanted me to ask you, and it ties into a question that I had as well. In influence in short story writers or fiction writers or artists, or anyone that you feel has influenced your writing, or this collection specifically, and so on a completely different page, and how those influences went against or supported your natural instincts, and how that might have gone up against any editing or any editorial feedback that you received. I'm asking this because I feel like there's a greater challenge in editing or receiving editing when there's so much sensuality and lyricism put into the writing in the first place.
Okay, well, I'll start with the creative influences first. So I wrote the collection over quite a long period. From start to finish, it was probably about 10 years. So I was reading a lot in that time, but in particular, I spent a lot of time when I was finishing up my dissertation, which I wrote on 3 creative memoirs. One was Inferno, a Poet's Novel by Eileen Myles, then Times Square Red, Times Square Blue by Sam Delaney, and the third one was Close to the Knives, a memoir of disintegration by David Wojnarowicz. So I was reading those books very closely, and I was also reading as much of the other work by those writers as I could. And though I don't think that Swimmers in Winter is similar to those books, I know that I learned so much from those writers about writing about voice and style and plot and representing queer experiences. So those would be 3 authors, and in particular, those 3 texts where I can kind of pinpoint as influences. And in terms of the editorial process, I was really lucky to be able to work with Invisible's fiction editor, Brian Ibias, and on this first book. And he's an incredibly perceptive and insightful editor. So that was a really useful process for me. I think that because it was a first book, part of what I was learning for myself was what my own creative instincts were or intuitions were. Because I think any artist or writer, one of the things about doing this kind of work is that you need to learn how to work most productively with your instincts, you know, and that takes time to learn how to trust them and to pay attention to them and decide what you're going to hold on to and what you're going to let go of in the process. And I know that I did a lot of revising with these stories, and so I think that that is also part of what led to the end result is just a lot of revising, figuring out the voices and the details and how I wanted to shape them.
And did you do all that before they got to Brian, or was that a collaboration in the editing?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a long process, but it was during that editorial process, yeah, where it was sort of the most productive time for me, because I was really working constantly on them. And that's also, I think, because, you know, every writer needs a reader, and often our editors are our first readers. So I think that that was also why, because it was great to be able to have a reader for the drafts and the revision, and there were a lot of them. So I'm grateful for that process for sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I think one of your questions was answered, and so way to go. You psychically answered somebody's question. And Kaylee, do we have any other questions?
Yep. I'll ask one from Lori because it ties really well into what you were just talking about. So Lori says, thank you for the beautiful reading. And were there any details you found in your research that you wanted to include but were not able to in the final version of the stories?
Oh, that's a great question, Lori. You know, one thing that I do remember, it had to do with a photograph that I found online, an archival photograph, and it was an image of 2 women standing together in a jail cell, and they'd been arrested from the street because of what they were wearing, which was sort of men's clothes. and they'd been arrested and they were in this jail cell together. And the way they were standing suggested that there was some kind of either a friendship between them or they were a couple. And I was really kind of interested in what might have been their story. And for a while, that was part of the second story in the collection. And I wrote a lot of scenes that had to do with the arrest and what the experience was like of being in jail. But in the end, I decided to let that go because I felt like I didn't have enough of that story to make it, to give them a kind of full enough presence. I would have needed to have known more about their story than just the fact that they'd been arrested. And also, I think that I also felt like it might have been just to have these characters being in jail like that, imprisoned. I realized like that's not where I wanted to put the energy of the story. That kind of suffering. So I decided to leave it out. And but I wonder if one day I might come back to the possibilities there in that story and explore that further. I know that I would need to do more research as well to know more. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Lori. I think there's 2 more questions. Kaylee?
Hannah had a question, and it was after you'd kind of finished the third reading, we were talking about the rhythmic imagery, and Hannah wanted to know if you had an art background.
Like a visual arts, I not for a long time, but I definitely, it feels close and familiar. And I did, when I was younger, I did paint and draw, and I certainly am very interested in other people's visual art. So it's not something that I create myself right now, but it is, it's an important kind of resource for me that I go to, and it feels close. And I often will think in images, and so I think that sort of visual focus is important to me as I'm writing, for sure.
Thank you. I think another one popped up. I think, Kaylee?
Yeah, we have a question from Misa, and Misa says, "Hi, and thank you for your beautiful reading. One of the things you mentioned is the theme of being seen. Can you talk more about this and how it is connected to your work on memoirs?"
Interesting. Well, so certainly in the stories, you know, part of what I'm looking at is the way that the characters see each other, how much they allow themselves to be seen or want to be seen. And again, you know, the kind of ways in which, you know, we never can maybe see as much as we would hope to see, or we only have one sort of, we can only ever see one piece, you know, of each other. Now, memoirs are a way of kind of, in some ways, stepping outside of that predicament, because a writer is sort of curating their lives in order to show other people. And I think in the process of doing that, they're also coming to understand themselves and see themselves in new ways. So I think, you know, when you're using the narrative voice of the first person, some of that is at play, you know, because a first person narrator is choosing what they will share and how they will share it. But then the interesting thing for the writer of that first person narration is you're kind of this other, you're like another layer to that, because you're also playing with, well, what is this character not able to show, or what is this character showing or not showing despite themselves? And so that's a kind of added dynamic in a first person narration that maybe isn't there in a memoir, where the memoir writer is making all the choices for themselves.
Right. That's interesting. It's funny how I never really think about, I mean, of course I know that memoir is in and of itself a kind of fiction, because just as you say, they're sharing, but I've never really thought about that withholding.
Uh-huh.
I always imagine that memoir writers are really, they're desiring to get deep into things, but that's interesting. I will be thinking about that the next memoir I read. I think there's one more question, Kaylee.
Yep, our last question is from Isa or Itza, and they ask if you have ever considered including photographs in this book.
I think like found photographs, I think that would be really interesting. It would add another kind of layer to the story. I think I think I could see using photographs that were not of people, but were of spaces or objects that could kind of coincide with the story in interesting ways. And I think that would be really interesting. So maybe that's an idea for another project. But just the way the visuals can work with text is really interesting to me. And because fiction writing becomes so much more alive when you are making it vivid imagery out of it, to actually have an image with the text just kind of amplifies that. So that's a really interesting idea, and I'm going to consider it for another project. Thanks.
Yeah, I love looking at Toronto specifically, because it just so happens to be where I live, but that kind of this is what it looks like today, and this is what it looked like in 1950.
Right.
I found that in going through the archives. Allen Gardens to me was a surprise, right? Like,
right.
Look at it, what it looked like in the 50s and what it looks like today. It's like this exact same, but you can almost feel how different it was, how different an experience it was for people in the 50s and how it is now.
Absolutely. And we know how land and spaces really kind of hold the past, or they hold the memories in them. So it's interesting to think about that in terms of this city, all of the different histories that are present here around us.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, thank you so much, Faye. I'm going to add, just before we do the raffle, don't leave everybody, because Kaylee's got everyone who registered for the event, your name has been put into a raffle, and you are going to get a copy of Swimmers in Winter mailed to you if you are the winner. So don't leave yet. I want to ask Faye what you are working on right now and what we can look forward to seeing from you.
Okay, well, I am working on a novel, and it is in its early stages, but it is also set in Toronto. And at this point, I think the focus is historical fiction. So it's sort of, I'm in an exciting period where there's so many different possibilities, and I need to give myself some kind of constraint to work within, so that I can really
Are you going decades back or a century back?
So I'm working right now. I'm thinking it's going to be the 20th century, and it's going to be sort of starting around maybe the 20s or the early 30s, and span some decades.
Very nice. I look forward to reading that.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Kaylee, for she is our event coordinator, the tech guru, the person who figures out everything for me. So I want to give a shout out to Kaylee for being here for me and for you guys. And she is going to do the raffle.
All right, I have to find a new seasonal tin for when it's no longer winter. All right, our winner of this raffle is Carolyn Black.
Aha, yay.
Carolyn. That's so awesome. Carolyn, if you can send me an email to junctionwrites@gmail.com, I will put you in touch with Faye and we'll get that book to you.
So yeah. and Allison, I want to thank you so much for having me and for including Swimmers in Winter in Junction Reads. It's been such an honor, and thank you for your really thoughtful questions about the book.
Thanks. And we'll be off for the Family Day weekend, and we'll be back with Brent Van Staldwinen on February 21st. And we're going to talk to Alicia Elliott on February 28th about her. She's been working on some poetry and she's got a novel coming out. So I hope you'll all come back and join us. And again, Faye, thank you, thank you, thank you. Kaylee, thank you. And everyone have a great night.
Thanks to everybody for being here as well.
And also to all of these videos, the videos for all of Junction Reads events are on our YouTube channel. So this will be up on YouTube within a half an hour. Please share with your friends and subscribe to the channel and share all of the videos of our author events.
Okay, thanks. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.